Principal Margaret Hayes pressed her palm against the cold, concrete wall of her office, feeling the vibrations from the construction crew's hammers echo through her bones. 27 years she had sat behind this same oak desk, watching generations of children pass through Jefferson Elementary's doors, but she had never imagined what lay hidden, just inches from where she worked every day. The renovation had been long overdue. The school board, after years of Margaret's persistent requests, had finally allocated funds to modernize the principal's office. What they hadn't expected was for the contractor, Miguel Santos, to call out in confusion from behind the false wall they were demolishing. "Ma'am, you need to see this." Miguel's voice carried a tremor that made Margaret's stomach clench. She had heard that tone before, the same uncertainty that colored a teacher's voice when they discovered something troubling about a student's home life. Margaret squeezed through the gap Miguel had created, dust motes dancing in the harsh light of his work lamp. The hidden compartment was small, perhaps 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep, but what it contained made her legs buckle. A burgundy leather purse sat on a makeshift wooden shelf, its surface coated with decades of dust but otherwise pristine. Beside it, a manila folder bulged with documents and photographs. And draped over everything like a burial shroud was a cream-colored blouse, its fabric stained with something dark that Margaret's mind refused to immediately identify as blood. "Should I call the police?" Miguel asked, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by the gravity of discovery. Margaret's hand shook as she reached for the purse. Inside, beneath layers of everyday items, lipstick, house keys, a half-empty pack of gum, she found a wallet. The driver's license photo stared back at her with familiar eyes. Denise Washington, age 34, smiling with the confident warmth Margaret remembered so vividly. October 15th, 1986. The date crashed into Margaret's consciousness like a freight train. She had been a second-year teacher then, young and idealistic, focused entirely on her classroom of third graders. But she remembered that day with startling clarity because it was when everything changed, when Denise Washington walked her children to school and simply vanished from the earth. "Mrs. Hayes!" Marcus Washington had stood in her classroom doorway that afternoon, his 8-year-old face streaked with tears. "My mama didn't come pick us up. Keisha's crying and I don't know what to do." Margaret had knelt beside him, her heart breaking at the confusion in his dark eyes. Denise Washington was the most reliable parent she knew, the kind of mother who arrived 15 minutes early for pickup, who never missed a school function, who knew every teacher's name and asked about their families. "She probably just got held up at work, sweetheart," Margaret had lied, even as cold dread settled in her stomach. "Let's call your grandmother." But Denise hadn't been held up at work. The investigation that followed revealed she had never arrived at her job at the community center that morning. Her car was found 3 days later in the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse on the city's east side, keys still in the ignition, her coffee cup still warm on the dashboard as if she had just stepped out for a moment. The police had questioned everyone. Margaret remembered Detective Morrison's tired eyes as he asked the same questions over and over. Had Denise seemed upset? Frightened? Had she mentioned any problems at home or work? Was there anyone who might want to hurt her? The answer to every question was no. Denise Washington had been, by all accounts, a woman without enemies, a devoted mother, a community volunteer, a steady presence in a neighborhood that desperately needed stability. Her disappearance made no sense, which perhaps explained why the investigation eventually went cold, why the media moved on to other stories, why the community's vigil candles eventually burned out. Now, standing in this hidden tomb of evidence, Margaret understood that everyone had been asking the wrong questions. With trembling fingers, she opened the manila folder. The first photograph made her gasp audibly. It showed her former colleague, Robert Peterson, the beloved fourth-grade teacher who had retired just 3 years after Denise's disappearance. In the black-and-white image, Peterson was shaking hands with a man Margaret recognized from old newspaper clippings. Vincent "Vinny" Marcelli, a known drug dealer who had operated in the neighborhood during the 1980s. The second photograph was even more damning. Peterson again, this time in what appeared to be the school supply closet, handing a package to another man Margaret didn't recognize. The timestamp in the corner read October 14th, 1986, the day before Denise vanished. Margaret's knees gave out entirely. She sank onto an overturned bucket, the folder spilling across her lap as more photographs scattered into the dusty light. Each image told the same horrifying story. Jefferson Elementary hadn't just been a school in 1986. It had been a front for a drug operation that used the building's legitimacy and the trust of the community to move narcotics through the neighborhood. And Denise Washington had somehow discovered it. The final item in the folder was a letter, written in Denise's careful handwriting on legal pad paper. Margaret's vision blurred as she read, "I don't know who to tell. I don't know who I can trust. I saw Mr. Peterson in the supply room last Tuesday after school with men I didn't recognize. They were passing packages, and when one fell open, I saw plastic bags filled with white powder. I know what that was. I've been watching since then, documenting what I can. Mrs. Clark in the front office is involved too. She's the one who lets these men into the building after hours. Even Principal Jameson knows. I heard him on the phone telling someone that the quote needed to be moved to Thursday because of parent-teacher conferences. They're using our children's school to poison our neighborhood. The same place where I drop off Marcus and Keisha every morning is being used to destroy other people's children. I can't let this continue. I've hidden this evidence where they won't think to look. If something happens to me, please know that I try to do the right thing. Marcus and Keisha need to know their mother didn't abandon them. I would never abandon them. Everything I do is to protect them and all the other children who deserve better than this. I'm going to confront them tomorrow morning. I know it's dangerous, but I can't live with myself if I stay silent. Some things are worth risking everything for, and our children's safety is one of them. Denise Washington. October 14th, 1986. Margaret clutched the letter to her chest, sobbing for the woman she had barely known but now understood completely. Denise hadn't vanished. She had been murdered for trying to protect the very children Margaret had spent her career serving. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made Margaret quickly gather the evidence. Miguel stood in the doorway, his face etched with concern. "Ma'am, are you all right? Should I—" "Give me a moment," Margaret managed, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, just give me a moment." After Miguel retreated, Margaret sat alone with the weight of 27 years of unknowing complicity. How many times had she walked past that supply closet? How many times had she chatted pleasantly with Mrs. Clark, never suspecting the woman was facilitating the destruction of their community? How many nights had she gone home to her comfortable suburban house, while Denise Washington's children wondered why their mother had abandoned them? But even as guilt threatened to consume her, Margaret recognized something else in Denise's letter, a courage that took her breath away. The woman had known she was risking everything. The tremor in her handwriting betrayed her fear, but she had chosen to act anyway, because silence meant allowing evil to flourish in a place children should be safe. Margaret thought of Marcus and Keisha Washington as she had last seen them, at their grandmother's funeral 5 years earlier. Marcus had grown into a serious young man who worked as a social worker, dedicating his life to protecting vulnerable children. Keisha had become a teacher herself, patient and nurturing with her students in a way that reminded Margaret achingly of their mother. Both carried themselves with a quiet sadness that Margaret now understood wasn't just grief. It was the specific pain of children who believed they had been abandoned by the person who should have loved them most. The weight of decision pressed down on Margaret's shoulders. She could rebury this evidence, let the dead rest, preserve the reputations of institutions and individuals who might still be harmed by the truth. Robert Peterson was in his 70s now, living quietly in Florida with his grandchildren. Mrs. Clark had died of cancer 8 years ago. Principal Jameson had passed away from a heart attack in 1999. The men in the photographs were likely dead or in prison for other crimes. What good would exposing this conspiracy do now? What purpose would it serve except to cause more pain? But every time Margaret's resolve wavered, she thought of Marcus and Keisha, still carrying the burden of believing their mother had chosen to leave them. She thought of Denise Washington, who had died alone and afraid, her sacrifice never acknowledged. She thought of all the other parents who dropped their children off at Jefferson Elementary every morning, trusting that their school was a sanctuary. The decision, when it finally crystallized, felt inevitable. Margaret gathered the evidence carefully, placed it in a secure box, and made a phone call that would change everything. Detective Rosa Rivera arrived 2 hours later. Margaret had specifically requested her because Rivera's reputation for integrity was unshakable, even when pursuing cases that made powerful people uncomfortable. She was a small woman, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing, the kind of investigator who understood that justice delayed was not necessarily justice denied. "This is going to be complicated," Rivera said after examining each piece of evidence with meticulous care. "Some of these people are dead. Others have spent decades building respectable lives. The statute of limitations has passed for most of the drug-related crimes. But not for murder," Margaret said quietly. "No, not for murder." Rivera's voice carried the weight of experience, of cases that had haunted her long after the files were closed. "But I have to warn you, this investigation will be painful for everyone involved. Are you prepared for that?" Margaret nodded, thinking of Denise Washington's children, now adults but still wounded by their mother's unexplained disappearance. Some truths are worth the pain they cause. The investigation that followed was everything Rivera had warned it would be. Margaret found herself questioned repeatedly about her own knowledge and involvement. Colleagues who had worked at Jefferson in 1986 came under scrutiny. The school board demanded answers about institutional failures and cover-ups. Some community members accused Margaret of seeking attention or trying to damage the school's reputation for personal gain. Others whispered that she was having a breakdown, that 27 years of stress had finally caught up with her. The local newspaper ran editorials questioning whether dredging up the past served any constructive purpose. But Margaret also discovered unexpected allies. Former students who remembered Denise Washington with deep affection came forward with their own memories and observations. A retired custodian named James Thompson approached Rivera privately, admitting that he had always suspected something wasn't right about the after-hours activities he occasionally witnessed. "I seen men coming and going at strange times," Thompson told the detective, his weathered hands shaking as he spoke. "But I was just the janitor, you know. Who was going to listen to me? And I had my own family to worry about." Even some family members of the implicated faculty came forward, burdened by decades of secrets and half-truths. Peterson's daughter contacted Rivera to admit that her father had always been paranoid about his time at Jefferson Elementary, refusing to discuss those years and becoming agitated whenever the subject arose. "He used to have nightmares," she confided. "He would wake up talking about that woman and what we had to do. I never understood what he meant, but it haunted him until the day he died." Slowly, painfully, the truth began to emerge. The drug operation had been more extensive than even Denise's investigation had revealed. Teachers, administrators, and even some school board members had been involved in a network that moved narcotics through multiple schools in the district. The profits had funded everything from personal luxuries to political campaigns, creating a web of corruption that had tentacles reaching far beyond Jefferson Elementary. Denise Washington had stumbled onto only a small piece of the operation, but it had been enough to sign her death warrant. Her confrontation with Principal Jameson on the morning of October 15, 1986, had been her last mistake. Rather than listening to her concerns, Jameson had alerted his co-conspirators. By noon, Denise was dead, her body disposed of in a way that ensured it would never be found. 6 months after Margaret's discovery, arrests were finally made. Vincent Marcelli, now 67 and living under an assumed name in Nevada, was charged with first-degree murder. 2 former school board members were indicted on conspiracy charges. The families of deceased conspirators faced civil lawsuits from community members whose children had been exposed to danger. But the most important moment came when Margaret sat down with Marcus and Keisha Washington in her renovated office, the same space where their mother's evidence had been hidden for nearly 3 decades. Marcus was 35 now, a tall man with his mother's gentle eyes and a quiet strength that reminded Margaret of Denise's determination. Keisha, 33, had her mother's smile and the same fierce protectiveness Margaret remembered from their childhood interactions. Both had families of their own now, children who would grow up knowing the truth about their grandmother's courage. "I need you to understand something," Margaret told them as Detective Rivera finished explaining the investigation's findings. "Your mother wasn't a victim who stumbled into danger. She was a hero who chose to fight for what was right, even when she knew the cost might be everything." Keisha wept openly, 27 years of suppressed grief finally finding release. "All this time I thought she didn't love us enough to stay. I thought we weren't worth fighting for." "She died fighting for you," Margaret replied firmly. Everything she did was to create a world where you and every other child would be safe. That's the kind of love that changes the world. Marcus reached for his sister's hand, both of them processing decades of pain and confusion. The truth was devastating in its implications, but it was also liberating. Their mother hadn't chosen to abandon them. She had chosen to sacrifice herself to protect them and countless other children. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Now you know," Margaret said simply. "You know that your mother was brave. You know that she loved you more than her own life. You know that her sacrifice meant something." As the siblings prepared to leave, Keisha turned back to Margaret. "Thank you for not giving up on her, for not giving up on us." After they left, Margaret remained in her office as evening shadows lengthened across the playground outside her window. The renovation was complete, but more importantly, a deeper restoration had taken place. The school felt different now, cleaner somehow. As if a poison that had festered for decades had finally been drawn out. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out a framed photograph she had discovered among Denise's effects. A school fundraiser picture from 1985, showing Denise kneeling beside a group of children, helping them paint a mural about community safety. The irony was almost unbearable. But so was the beauty of a woman who lived her values even unto death. Margaret placed the photograph prominently on her bookshelf, where Denise Washington's smile would forever watch over the children she had died protecting. Outside, the sounds of the neighborhood continued, children playing, families gathering for dinner, life persisting in all its complex, beautiful messiness. But within the walls of Jefferson Elementary, there was finally peace. The truth hadn't brought everyone happiness. Too much pain had been endured, too many years lost to lies and silence, but it had brought something more valuable: justice, understanding, and the knowledge that one woman's courage had ultimately triumphed over institutional corruption. In the gathering darkness, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in 27 years, the quiet satisfaction of having honored a mother's sacrifice and ensured that her children finally knew the depth of her love. Some endings aren't happy, but they are right, and sometimes being right is enough.